So I am really excited about this video topic. This is something that I just learned last week from Peter Kravanek in a comment on a LinkedIn post. And I've been using Power BI since the day it came out, and I did not know that this existed or that you could do this. This video is about how to query information about your model and show it to your report viewers. So that's the key differentiator there. This is something that can help increase trust in your data. It can help answer questions before they get asked. So something that happens a lot is your viewers asking, how is this measured? And usually what people do is they direct them to an external page somewhere that has documentation about how things are measured. But with this, you can have a single source of truth, and that source of truth can live in your model. So the gist of this is that we can show our viewers our measure expressions, our measure descriptions, our column descriptions, our column types, and our table descriptions if we want to. This relationship diagram I have here is just a screenshot. You can query information about the relationships in a Power BI model, but I find it works better to have something that is a visual representation for people. And another kind of fun thing you can do with it is you can use it dynamically. So for example, I have a field parameter table here, and when I change this field parameter table, I've got a tooltip. This tooltip has a description of what's being measured, and it changes when people select different things in the field parameter table. And this is coming directly from information about my model. So it's maintained by adding measure descriptions. If you're not familiar with where these things are added initially, the model view tab over here in Power BI, if you go to any one of your measures, you can add a description. So this description here is something that shows in a tooltip when people are building things off of your model in Power BI. And what happens is when we query the information about our model, this description shows up as a column in a data table in Power Query. If you don't want to hand write descriptions for your columns and measures, Brian Julius did a pretty cool post where he shows how to have AI use the same sources that we're looking at today to write these for you. And you can do this for columns and tables as well. So if I come down to, say, tasks, this table has a description. That's something you can surface, as well as the field information. So if I click on one of these fields, this has a description, and it has formatting settings, data type, etc. So that's what we're going to be extracting. And we can do this in Power Query. So let me show you what that looks like. So in Power Query, I have a table for the measures in my model that shows me the measure name and the description and the data type and the expression. And I also have a similar table for the tables and columns in my model. What this lets you do if you parameterize these things is you can copy and paste this entire set of queries between semantic models without having to redo all of your query steps each time. So for example, I'm just going to take this whole chunk of queries here. I'm going to do Control C on my keyboard. So this is an entire separate model using entirely separate data sources. If I paste these here, I can update the workspace name, which is actually the same, and then the model name. So this is now Adventure Works. And now if I go to the measures, that'll load. What these do when they run is they ask you for permission first. So you do need to go in and click edit permission and click on run when you run these the first time. This report doesn't have any table descriptions. So I'm going to show you how to do this two ways today, and we'll go through why you would use one way versus another way when we get to it. And I want to point out here that this data is also available in the Power BI admin usage API. If you have an ability to work with that, if you know how to make data pipelines, if you're a data engineer, that's a totally legitimate way to go also. The technique we're doing today is lighter weight. It's more of a low code approach. So in Power Query, we're going to do the technique where we query the model in the Power BI service first. So I'm going to go to the Manage Parameters dropdown in the Home tab in Power Query and click on New Parameter. We're going to call this WorkspaceName. You can put a description if you want to. I'm not going to make it required. And then put in whatever the name of your workspace is. So this does work with workspaces that have spaces in the name. Just put them in as spaces. It's fine. Mine is called test, and click OK. And then we're going to do the same thing. So new parameter, and this parameter is going to be for the semantic model name. Not required, current value. I think mine is called Premium Planner Dashboard. If you want Premium Planner data, by the way, I just did a video on how to pull that from Dataverse. So That's where this is coming from. So it does take spaces. That's fine. I'm going to click OK again. All right, so now we're going to do our query. I'm going to go to New Source in the drop-down menu up here and choose Blank Query. And we are going to, in this little box, type an equals. And then we're going to use the Analysis Services connector. I'm going to paste in this code because it's kind of long and I don't want to type the whole thing. I'm going to put this code in the video description in case you want to copy and paste also. If for whatever reason YouTube doesn't like special characters and whatnot in the description, which sometimes happens, then I'll put it in my blog, but it'll be in the description one way or another. So here's our query, AnalysisServices.Database, and then we feed it this URL, which is the same every time. And then we can concatenate on our workspace name with an and. So this is referencing our parameter we just created. This is what makes it so that we can copy and paste this set of queries between files. And then our semantic model name, and then our query. So initially, I'm going to be just querying the DB schema underscore tables, but this part right here is the part you change in order to query different things about your model. So hit the checkbox here. It's going to ask you for permission to run the query. It only does this the first time. So we're going to say edit permission and then run, and then it'll ask you for credentials. So the important thing here is to make sure that you choose Microsoft account type, and then click connect. All right, so this is going to show you information about what you're able to query with this technique. So if you scroll down and look at this, these table names here are what you can put in this slot right here to query different things. You can't query every single one of these tables. You don't have access to every single one of them, but you can query a lot of them that are important. So your tables, your columns, your measures. My understanding is that if you have premium Power BI, you can query more. So I got permission denied errors on some of these. I was talking to Peter and he says that he has access to more of them. So just keep that in mind as you're going through here. And another thing to point out is that some of these tables are used with different compatibility levels of your model. So what Peter was telling me is that the tables at the 1200 and higher compatibility level use the TM schema, and the ones that are at 1100 and 1103 use the DB and DM schema. So keep that in mind. Really all that means is if you go into a table and you can't access it or there's nothing there, try the other one that has a similar name. So if I'm looking for information about tables in my model, this table type of table right here is going to be the ones you want to use because these are the ones that have the descriptions for the table, okay? So these tables are in here twice. They're in here as system table and table table. The table type of tables do have a description. So if we want to change this query to be only the tables, what we can do is just filter this down to table. And then if you want to make this a little bit friendlier, you can strip off the $ here. So I'm just going to right click the column and do replace values. And wow, I don't know what's going on with the size of this window. That's special. Okay, so we're going to replace the $ with nothing. So just leave this blank. So now if we want to get information about our columns, we can just duplicate this table. I'm going to right click on it and click on duplicate. I'm going to rename this so that I don't get confused. And I'm going to delete those 2 steps we just added to the last query because we don't need those. So delete those. In the source step, we can just take this DB schema right here in the query and change this tables word to columns and hit the checkbox. Give it permission again. And here's our columns. So I will point out that it does seem to have the auto summarization columns in here. So you can filter those out. It also has some kind of strange row number rows in here. So we can remove those also. So what we want to do is just go to the little filter triangle up here and do a text filter and say does not contain. So I'm just going to put double underscore in here because all of those auto summarization measures had double underscore in the name. And then I'm also going to do a does not contain the row number and a hyphen. So row number hyphen, and then click OK. So if we scroll over, way over, almost to the end, you'll notice that the description field is blank. So I have column descriptions on some of my columns. I know I do. It doesn't show it in here. Peter was telling me that he sees it in his query and he's using perhaps one of the other schema tables. So the TM schema versus the DM schema versus the DB schema, whatever. I checked all of them and I couldn't find one that has a description that I have access to at the pro tier. This may be a premium only thing, I'm not entirely sure, but that's why I have a second technique in this video for how to query this a different way, because I couldn't get the descriptions this way. I can get the descriptions for measures. If anyone finds the column descriptions that actually work, by the way, at pro tier, please let me know in the comments, because this technique is a lot more sustainable than the other one I'm going to show you in a little bit. So that was columns. Let's get our measures. I'm going to do the same thing as last time, just duplicate this query, right click, duplicate, remove the steps that we added to get back to our source. And this time I'm going to replace this whole db schema underscore columns with md schema underscore measures. So md schema underscore measures is where the measures are at. Hit the checkbox, give it permission, click on run. Let's rename this. All right, so here we have our measure name. The caption seems to look like the same thing as the name to me, but I could be missing something. And then the data type. So this data type again is an ID. We want to take that so that we can get the text label for it later. If you want the precision, you can. I don't feel like that's super important to show people. And then the description is here. So we do get a description for the measures and the expression. So this is usually the part that people want to see. I like to take this measure is visible column because it lets you filter out the things that you're trying to hide. And then the display folder is pretty useful too, because I like to, as you can see here, take measures that I use temporarily but might want to get back again later into a graveyard folder. So this lets me filter those out based on the folder if I'm trying to display them to users. And then the formatting column here, if you care about that. So right click, remove other. If you wanted information about your data types for your measures and columns, we can get that at, let me duplicate this one more time, last time. The data types are going to be, I'm going to remove this step and then go back to the source. We're going to replace this md schema underscore measures with db schema underscore provider underscore types. The checkbox, give it permission, run. So here you can see the data type and the type name. I'm just going to take those two and remove other, and we're going to load that. We're going to put a relationship on this between the measures and columns and this dimension table. So close and apply. I'm going to go to the model view over here to make our relationships. We can drag these tables onto, I'm creating another view in my layouts, by the way. So let me zoom out a little bit. All right, so we got our measures, our data types, our columns, and our tables. We can relate these. So this table name here can relate to table name down here, save. I didn't take table name for the measures because all of my measures live in one table. They're not in the data tables where the data is at. If you wanted to, you could also relate tables to measures. Now that you've got your relationships in here, you can drop these things into table visuals or whatever kind of visual you want to show people information about your model. So now I'm going to talk about that dynamic aspect that you saw earlier. So that was this tooltip that changes based on the selected measure. So this is a field parameter table. If you're not familiar with field parameters, I'll show you how to do it super duper quick. What I always like to do in Power BI is put my field parameters for measures and my field parameters for dimensions into separate field parameter tables. That lets you use them in a more structured way. So for example, I can go to the modeling tab here, new parameter, fields is the field parameter type, and then I can choose some measures to put in here. So for example, take these three and count completed, count overdue. And I'm going to call this measures parameter and click OK. So I can use this in a chart. I'm just going to drop one in here real quick to show you. So we drag in from our field parameter table our measure and put that in the x-axis for this horizontal one, and then drop a dimension in there. So I'm just going to use assignee name like that. So right now this is showing all of the measures. So we just want one of them at a time. I'm going to set this to single select and change it to selection single select because I only want people to have one selected at a time. So now it changes based on our measures, but we don't have that description in there. What we want to do for the description, if we look at the table in Power BI, so this parameter that we just created a calculated table. This calculated table has the measure name here in a very specific format. What this means is that you can create a relationship between this column and your measures metadata as long as you can get something that matches between the two tables. So this is formatted a little bit differently than the traditional measure name, but all you need to do is take the way that this is structured and tack that on to your measure name in your measures metadata. So if I go back into the query editor and then go look at our measures table, I can add a column on here. So I can go to the add column option in the toolbar, choose custom column. What do I want to call this? Measure name for relationship, whatever you want to call it. So here's how this works. It's really going to depend on how you're using your measures. If you have measures in multiple tables, you want to get the table name in here. So that should have been one of the columns on your measures table. So you would concatenate in double quotes a single quote because that was around the table name, right? And then an and then you would double click your table name over here if you have it. And then you would do another and then you would close the single quotes and then continue on. All of my measures are in the same table. So I'm just going to do a double quotes. And then in there, I'm going to do a single quotes underscore measures and then another single quotes. So again, you can make this dynamic on your table name if you want to. Square bracket and then an and then your measure name and then another and double quotes, close the square bracket. So this is basically just putting your table name and your measure name into the same format as that field parameter table and then click OK. So see how that looks exactly the same? We can close and apply this now and then make a relationship between this column and our field parameter table. So go to the model view that we were looking at before and then drop your parameter table onto this view. So the column you want to use is this measures parameter fields. That's going to be one that has a measure name in it. And we're going to relate it to the column we just created, which was this measure name for relationship up here. It's going to be 1-to-1. That's okay. So now what we can do if we go back to our report is we can add a tooltip in here. So it's under buttons and then information. You could use the help one too if you wanted to. I like to decrease the stroke weight a little bit on this because it's kind of gigantic. Make it like 2 or 1. So now we just make a measure that we link to this visual that shows description for the measure that's selected. And because that relationship is there, it's going to know which measure we're talking about, right? So I'm going to make a new measure. I'm going to call this selected measure description and set it equal to the selected value of the measure description in our measures table. Hit OK. All right, so for this particular visual, we can, if we have it selected, turn the action on. The action is what makes it do things. And for the type, so the thing with the tooltip is you have to have something selected in this dropdown in order to use the tooltip. So I don't want it to have an action of back. So I'm just going to change it to web URL and then not put in a web URL. That basically just makes it do nothing when people click it because I don't want it to do things when people click it. I just want it to have a tooltip. So the tooltip has a FX button. If you click that, you can set it to your measure that we just created. I have another one in there from earlier when I deleted stuff, but so select that measure, click OK. And now I'm going to filter out blanks. It's showing blanks here because of that relationship now. Some of my measures don't have descriptions. I'm going to just remove blank there. So now when I change this, it's going to show me the description for the measure that I have selected. So this one is tasks that are not complete and their end date is less than today. So there's that trick. Next, I want to show you how to get the column descriptions if you really want the column descriptions. If you recall from earlier, they were all null in the service. So another technique that we can use here is to get them from a BIM file. That's BIM. The BIM file is something that holds information about your model, and you can generate this thing through Tabular Editor. I believe that the free version of Tabular Editor will do this. I happen to be using Tabular Editor 3, but what you do is you just open up your model in Tabular Editor, and you don't have to do anything in here. All you do is you save as and give it a name, and that creates a BIM file. So what this means is that when you make changes to your model and you want those changes to be reflected in Power BI, you need to update that BIM file. The BIM file has more information in it, so it's kind of fun to browse around and look at it. So here's how we get that information. If we go to the query editor again, like we were before, and we go to New Source, and then choose More, we want to choose the JSON type source. So JSON is the format that the BIM file is in if you open it up to look at it. So we can use that. The thing is that it's not a JSON type file extension. So what you do is you change this file type selector here to all files, and then you'll be able to see it. So here's mine. I'm going to load that. And here's what it looks like to start. So you need to expand this out. So your relationships are going to be in this relationships expansion. Your tables are going to be in tables. So I'm going to expand out tables, expand to new rows. So we're going to expand out tables with the expando arrows here. And we just want the columns. So for columns, if we expand that and then expand it again. So notably, the description is not in this initial UI. You need to click on load more here in order to get the description. So now we can see it here. If I load those, we have all of our data types. So these are a little bit more user-friendly than the other mechanism because they're in here as text already. You don't have to relate anything. It tells you whether or not the column is a key, what it's summarized by, the format string, and then here's our description. So you can load this data and then relate it on the table name in order to use it in the same way that we were using our column metadata earlier. Since this is a JSON file on your computer right now, what I would recommend is either putting that BIM file in SharePoint and then changing the source to SharePoint Online. I have a video on how to do that. I'm going to link it in the description. You could also just disable refresh on this table. Just right click on it and turn off the include and refresh, and then refresh it manually when you want to. So you can refresh individual tables in here. So if I right click on this one, there's an option to refresh this as an individual table. This will work even if you have the include and refresh turned off. That was everything I had for you today. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.